Okay, welcome. See, we were early for a reason. So I'm Diane Bisgeier. Actually, my new name is Tate, Diane Tate. I just got married, so I always forget what I go by. But so I am with Mozilla, and specifically Mozilla's Web Forward program, which is our accelerator program to help startups that Mozilla is aligned with. And I'm happy to go into that later. But the thing that I wanted to talk about today, and I don't have a ton of sort of lecture type materials, but what I wanted to do is just set the general landscape for developers today that are interested in becoming entrepreneurs. So talking about the general landscape and resources and tools that are available to you as developers who are aspiring entrepreneurs. So hopefully that sounds good. I don't think my talk will take very long, and so I am really open to lots of questions and discussion. I don't purport to have all the answers, but I'm sure a lot of you in the room have ideas and resources and tools that you are aware of too. So I think a rich, lively discussion following the little bit that I'm going to share would be really great. So sound good? Yay! Okay, awesome. Thanks for coming. So just to set the context, in 2013, it indeed has never been easier to start a web or a tech company specifically. By low barriers to entry, which is a very MBA sounding term, what that means is that there's not a lot of things that prevent you from starting a company. You can use lots of cloud services and hosting services for cheap to free to get things up and running. So to set up shop, there's lots of templates for incorporating, and all the things that used to cost a lot of money are much cheaper, if not free, today. So getting started is really easy. Access to capital is easier today. There's funding available through web platforms like AngelList. There's ways to connect with investors that are interested in specifically your area of interest that is a lot more transparent and a lot less friction getting access to that capital today than there ever has been before. So that is also something that makes it lots easier to set something up. There's networks of people, meetup networks, again, things like AngelList, not only for capital, but also to find talent. LinkedIn, AngelList, GitHub is a form of a network for you to find people that are doing things that are similar to what you're doing. So again, all these things are contributing to making it really easy to set things up. And then finally, platforms. GitHub is a platform. There's distribution platforms like Facebook. Lots of things that when you create an app, you're not just solely out there on your own using all of your resources to get discovered, but if you're part of a platform, you're more easily discoverable as a business. So again, all these things contribute to what Dave McClure calls the geek renaissance. Dave McClure is head of 500 Startups, which is a global accelerator network. They go to Brazil, they go to India, to Asia, to all over, as well as have headquarters in Mountain View, and do lots of cool, fun startup programs. And so he's written a lot about this geek renaissance. If you go on SlideShare, you can see his presentations on that. So the geek renaissance is here. So yay, that's really, really exciting, right? But one thing has not changed, and that is finishing well. So you can definitely get started with all these great resources and tools available to you, but finishing has always been hard, and it continues to be hard. And just some of the things that I put up here is, back in the day of Microsoft when they started in 1975, and as one benchmark, they didn't go public until 11 years later. Google started in 1995. It took them 9 years to go public. Facebook started in 2003. It took them 9 years to go public. So as much as we like to think that these companies just kind of flew and grew with like hyper speed, the Instagrams of the world are extremely rare. So the fact that Instagram was up and, sold for $1 billion within like 2 years is completely the exception. Even the most successful companies like Facebook and Microsoft took a long time, nearly a decade, to get into the public markets. So it's a long slog. That's been true in technology, and it continues to be true. So in the startup world, when you're a startup, I put Y Combinator up there, Y Combinator, another very high profile accelerator program along the lines of 500 startups. Over the about 4 or 5 years that they've been in existence, they have received over 10,000 applications, and they've accepted about 500. So their acceptance rate is between 3 and 5%. So they're extremely selective about the kinds of startups that they work with. And of the Y Combinator companies, I just want to make sure I get the stat right, only, let's see, what percent? 7% of all the portfolio companies that they've worked with are over $40 million valuation, which, again, for the world of startup funding, that is not a huge hit rate, right? 7% of this highly selective 500 company portfolio that Y Combinator chose, only 7% is above a $40 million valuation. So the things that you read about in TechCrunch tend to be very much the exception, very much the outlier. It's still extremely hard to do well. And then finally, the world of venture capital, again, sexy venture capital. You always read about the VCs and their blogs, and just everyone wants to talk to a VC, but it's not a lucrative business. It takes on average 3 years for a VC-funded company to get to an M&A event. And again, those are the ones that get to an M&A event. Every year, 97% of all venture capital returns are attributable to 15 deals. So for all the companies that are out there and that are funded, that go through this vetting process of getting access to a VC, let alone getting funded by a VC, only 15 deals account for 97% of all the returns. So all this to say, as much as we like to read about starting a company and growing and scaling and all this stuff, very few companies make it, and it takes them a really long time. And this tweet really summarized it. So Danielle Morel, most people might know of her when she headed up marketing for Twilio, and now she's got a company called Mattermark, which is publishing a lot of startup analytics for entrepreneurs. But she basically said it may be easier to invest now, but it's making them grow will continue to be just as hard, which pretty much sums up what I'm saying. So that sounds grim, but there's good news. And by the way, the reason that it's hard, I should just go into that. Why is it so hard? And I would say it's the execution thing, right? So as engineers, as entrepreneurs, we have big visions and big ideas about how we're going to change the world. But taking that from a core idea or a core technology that you've coded to something that's actually successful in the market is hard for a reason. And that's because there's so much that has to happen to be successful. It's not just one thing. It's the confluence of many things, unless you're, again, this outlier that has one really lucky thing happen to you. You've got to fire on all fronts. You've got to do your marketing well. You've got to do your partnership well. You've got to do your legal strategy well and your licensing strategy well, especially if you're an open source company. You've got to think through that. You've got to be able to sell. You've got to manage your money well. So there's all these things that you have to do to be successful. So it's no wonder that it's so difficult for companies to do well. So here's the hope. So yes, I've shared with you how difficult it is, but there's hope in that there's tons of resources today for you to learn from before you jump in and make this huge investment and this huge commitment of your life and your resources. I just put Lucy up there because we all know who she is, but she may not help you with your startup. But there's tools out there. General Assembly has offered tons of courses. So if you're not a designer, but you need to build some design chops because there's only a few of you working on your startup, you can take a design class at General Assembly. You don't have to go to design school. So they're bringing all these disciplines to entrepreneurs to make them much more accessible, so you get what you need rather than fully committing to learning a whole new discipline. So General Assembly is one example of how people are getting the tools and the skills that they need without investing a ton of time and efforts. Two people in the top right corner, just some examples of blogs that I personally love to read. The guy on the left is Mark Suster, and he has a blog called Both Sides of the Table. And the guy on the right is Fred Wilson. He's with Union Square Ventures, and he has a blog blog called AVC. These are two of, I'd say, lots of really good blogs about doing startups. So again, they're investors, so they have that perspective, but Mark Suster has been an entrepreneur himself. He sold a company to Amazon, and I highly recommend you, if you think that you may have the entrepreneurship bug and you're not ready to jump in, start reading their blogs. Start getting a feel for what you're up for. It's a great way to dip your toe in the water. Fail Chat is a really fun conference. It actually just happened on Monday, but they happen, I think, about every 6 months. And that's a chance to learn from entrepreneurs about things that they did wrong, which can be very helpful because it's really good to benefit from other people's pain instead of your own pain. So they also host a series of Fail Chats, which are not an entire day-long conference, but they're just discussions. So I recommend conferences like that. The beauty about the Bay Area is that I think the culture is such that people are willing to share about their failures, and it's very accepting of that. So Fail Chat sort of embodies that culture of learning from other people and from their failures in particular. Perry Soma is another example of just one of many, many resources that offer learning and on a number of topics, sort of on that slide that I got to previously. All this stuff, you can get a lot of it from General Assembly online, and you can get a lot of it from places in person, such as Perry Soma. So they're south of Market. And then finally, meetup groups are another great way to connect with people that are working more specifically on what you're working on. It's also a great way to recruit people for your team. So if you are building something in Ruby, you go to the right Ruby meetup and you meet people that have your skill set. So it's another great way to connect with people. Again, making that friction easier so you can do the execution stuff better. Now, with all that said, I would just summarize, if I had to boil it down to one thing, because I hate to, because I think that all this stuff is really important. It's really hard to just nail marketing and do well. Like, you kind of have to do it all well. But that said, I would urge developers in particular who are planning on starting a business, if they had to focus on only one thing, it would be what we call user research. And that is basically taking your idea and going to the people that you think are going to use your idea or your product and spending time with them. There's a whole discipline and way to do user research that can make it more effective for you. And we have all the resources available on our website, which I'll share with you in a second. But I think one of the most common mistakes among most entrepreneurs, and particularly developers who are entrepreneurs, is being so in love with your solution and your technology that you forget that people and their daily habits and their daily workflow and how they use things could be completely different than what you're envisioning. And so going and spending time with people, it's incredibly enlightening and often surprising how people actually behave in real life and the kinds of solutions that would actually meet what they're looking for. So if I have to start with any one of those disciplines on that slide on execution, I would say user research. And again, our website, which is listed at the top left corner of the slide, we have a whole, we have actually like 2 or 3 different posts on user research. You can go to the resources tab and check it out. They basically outline what you can do to effectively find the right people to talk to. It's called a screener. So first of all, you have to find out who you're going to talk to based on what you're interested in building. And then from there, how can you effectively surface the information that you need to build a product that's going to make sense for them. So there's kind of 2 parts to that process. It's the screener, finding the right people, and then the questionnaire, which is figuring out what to do with those people once you're with them to elicit the right information that will help you build a product. So I encourage you to check out our user research tools on our website, WebForward. WebForward, again, is Mozilla's startup program, and we work with mainly developer-led companies. In fact, one of our teams is in the room. Austin, right there. So feel free to talk to Austin if you want, if you have questions about our program, or me. But it's a 3-month program, and it's for entrepreneurs that tend to be developers because we are specifically interested in supporting startups that are doing something very innovative around the web. So unlike other accelerator programs that are primarily interested in high growth companies we're not against growth. Trust me, we're not against growth. But our primary priority is that there's something innovative happening with the technology. And so as a result, most of our founders tend to be developers. They're doing something, they're pushing the boundaries of what the web can do, which is what Mozilla wants to support through Web Forward. So most of our founders are developers, so we work with them a lot. And we provide lots of tools that you'll see on our website, as well as coaching and mentorship. And applications are actually open until December 15th if you want to go on our website. But that is pretty much all I wanted to share about the general environment and what's available to you as developers. So it's not a really long talk. So at this point, I am perfectly happy to have a conversation and answer any questions you have. So awesome. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I mean, yes. So competitive and market analysis, I mean, there's certainly like the old school firms like Forrester and Frost & Sullivan that do a lot of work. There's also more niche firms that focus on, say, mobile. So if you're building a mobile app, I think Ovum is like a really well-known mobile market research firm. So I would almost recommend actually going to a more vertical firm that's focused on what you're building. So it depends, but there's lots of firms that the downside is a lot of them don't publish their stuff. They publish very high-level results to tease you to buy the reports. So because market research takes a lot of work, there's labor involved. Yeah, OVUM. I'm pretty sure they're out of the UK, off the top of my head. I think is the GMIC event happening across the street? But that would be, if you're building something for mobile, you may want to wander over there and see what you can find out. Sure. The other thing, I mean, I would just quickly add, and then we'll go to your question, is Guy Kawasaki has a book called The Art of the Start, and I would say the notion of a business plan is definitely changed over the last 10 years. Most investors don't look at business plans anymore. They look at an executive summary or a deck. So so the idea of having like a full-blown like 30-page business plan is pretty much gone, especially because the market changes so much. But in Guy Kawasaki's book, he talks about building the market. Most people like to say, for example, that they're building something for a market that's like, it's a $5 billion market, and I can get, conservative estimates, 2%. Therefore, I can get this many millions of revenue. And he totally argues the opposite way. He says, like, what can you get? Like, build from the ground up as opposed to the macro down. It's a much more sellable argument to investors. It's a much more feasible go-to-market strategy. So I wouldn't get bogged down too much in macro stuff. It's helpful as context, but it's better to think about your specific go-to-market and what you can reasonably get as opposed to the macro and slicing out a percentage of that just because it sounds good to say 2% or something like that. So, where are you going to?
Yeah, you did mention some of the success stories like Google and Facebook and Microsoft, and I suspect that it's likely not, no one in here is going to have that kind of success story. However, I think a lot of people in here probably have the potential to build a company and sell it for maybe $500,000 after maybe 8 months of work. And a lot of those acquisitions seem to occur privately. Do you have any data or any comments on how successful or the potential for success of building something on that scale?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I don't have the stats. I would say Kauffman Foundation most likely has some. The problem is that because those transactions are private, it's harder to get information on them. So a lot of that stuff is not required to be disclosed. Like if a private company buys another private company, as one example, that stuff doesn't necessarily have to be disclosed. But I would go with the Kauffman Foundation. But yes, you're absolutely right. There's a lot more smaller transactions, of course, So, and I applaud that. I don't think anyone should be ashamed if their goal is that, as long as they're clear. When you're raising institutional money, and if you're talking to, say, a venture capitalist, that's not the game that they play. The game that they play is very large exits, and so just be clear, if that's your goal, is either that size of a company or that size of an exit, then make sure you're just talking to the right people as investors or as partners to begin with, so you're not frustrated.
I noticed in the Bay Area that the talk is always about getting to going public as opposed to actually just building something and making something that you can support your family, become self-sufficient, by selling the company. It seems like there's not a lot of resources that are around here that are directing people towards being able to do something successful on that scale.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame given the numbers, right? It's so rare to go public. It's so, I talked about Google and Microsoft, but again, those things are so, like I said, 15 deals account for 97% of the venture capital returns, right? So they're so rare. So I think it just depends on, the thing is, the resources that I shared, though, I think can be applied to building any healthy business as well, right? So I would still encourage you to check them out. Yeah.
When it comes to projecting out for financials, do you have any resources? Because I find that I don't know where to begin with something like that. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, we have some templates on our website as well for financials. Our teams always tend to want to copy a template from somebody else. Like if somebody's in the cloud services, they want to look at Heroku and say, like, what was Heroku's growth trajectory? And maybe we can just plug those numbers in. And the problem is, it's very specific to your market and to you have to really extrapolate some of the, say, like the customers that you've been talking to. It's really hard to generalize some of that stuff because your particular product and your particular market, your country, your geography, whatever, you can use a proxy of another company, but just be aware of where it's not going to apply.
Who would you talk to then? You go to an accountant or somebody who can help you project out? Because like maybe the market's very specific and to a specific country or specific location.
Yeah.
For that kind of, those are the numbers where
Right.
You're also very good at figuring out not necessarily the solution, but figuring out the product. When you come to projecting, what's going to happen in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years.
I think you have to look at your financials just like your code, iterative development. So as you get feedback from people, you're going to change your code and you're going to change your features as people give you feedback. And your financials, the financials from before you've launched anything or talked to any customers, it's going to be very theoretical, and the variance between that and reality is probably going to be pretty high, but you should be updating them. So if you go out and talk to a prospective customer, immediately you're going to get a better sense of what they're willing to pay and what the terms of the payments are. Is it monthly? Is it licensing? And then you get a better sense of your costs. Once you hire people, once you know what the labor market is, you can bake in the costs a little bit more precisely. So we have templates that you can certainly use on our website, but I would say it's something that you need to refine as you get more information on your product and on your market. So your salesperson, whether that's you as the founder, probably, you're going to be the most, you're going to be providing the most accurate information for the financials as opposed to an accountant who may be trying to fit you into some box that another client was in but doesn't necessarily apply to you.
Okay.
That would be my opinion. One there and then one there.
So I became a developer, but I have a very specific thing in mind that I want to build and my goal is to become as full stack as possible for me, and a lot of this stuff is very achievable and interesting. One of the pieces that I'm not terribly interested in is legal, which is probably one of the most important things, because I want to do stuff with music, which is IP, so you have to be sure that you're careful about what, and me not getting sued because somebody steals something from somebody else using my product, right? Do you have any good resources for someone like me who may not, I wouldn't mind being, knowing a little bit, but yeah, I don't know if you have any good resources.
Yeah, I mean, music, if you're doing music tech, you probably have to pretend like you're a lawyer at least some of the time. And I just know that my husband's really involved in music tech. But there are lawyers that specialize in music tech stuff that I could probably refer you to. In general, some good legal resources are available through Oric. They're a leading tech firm in the Bay Area, and they have a whole website called Total Access. So it's ORRICK. And in there, they have stuff that almost any startup can use around incorporation. They have some templates for incorporation and for term sheets. And then, again, on our website, we have a number of videos where an attorney actually talks through a lot of the issues around incorporating. So specific to music, I would say get someone that knows what they're doing, and I can give you a couple names probably, actually. But general startup stuff, Oric is a great resource. Our website has some stuff. We also work with Wilson Sonsini a lot. I'm not sure if they've published anything on their website, but they obviously work with tons of startups. So I think more startups are really investing in, or more law firms, I should say, are investing in startups because they realize that there's a lot of potential there. So it's in their interest to do so. But check out Oric Total Access for some basic tools as well. Oh, yeah.
About the user research tools on your website, like can you talk about a bit more like the best tool or the best place to start with the user research, like strategies that you can use to find and narrow down your market impact?
Yeah, that's what's on the website. So we have a video that literally, it gives an overview of user research, and then it actually walks you through how to get started. So the point of all the stuff on our website is to actually get you to implement stuff. So so it points you, it helps you, it walks you through building a screener. So you can actually go out and find the right people. Yes. So like within our Web Forward program, that's probably the week that's the busiest for our teams because like Austin can attest to it. Because first you have to build your screener to figure out who you want to talk to based on what you're doing. And then you have to go out and talk to people. And that takes time. It definitely takes time. I think it's a lot of reason why a lot of developers don't do it because it's time with other people and you're not coding. So you feel like somehow it's less productive, but it's actually the most productive thing you can do. Right. Right, but if you just look at it as like learning, it's learning that's going to save you a lot of money and time later.
Does Kotlin help you to connect with those type of people?
Does what help you connect?
Does the website give you a tool that helps you to connect with those type of people?
It gives you tips on how to find them. Ultimately, you need to like talk to people. Yeah. Okay, wait. 1, 2, and then 3. Oh.
There are services and tools out there that you don't have to interact with anybody. You can go out, create your plan, and implement or put it to these other companies. They'll go out for like $50 or $100 a pop. Then they'll give you the actual research back, which includes anything from eye tracking movements of your app or your website.
For web products, that's probably feasible. I would say, yeah.
Then they'll give you like video feedback. The users will talk through their problems or what they found and trying to achieve whatever goal you set forth. There's a lot of tools.
You can. My personal feeling is that if you outsource that, you outsource something that's very critical to your success. I mean, you can do that, but what? Yeah, and maybe for big companies with mature products, for sure. My own personal advice would be if you're starting something brand new, do that as directly as you can, even if it's out of your comfort zone, because ultimately, like, you're creating something brand new. I think for mature products, it can be really, really a great way to scale, to leverage the resources through other firms. But when you're building something brand new, it's like you don't know what you don't know when something is new, and so it's amazing like what you can discover if you know how to ask probing questions, and a lot of that comes up in the conversation with the person, like it comes up in the moment. So a lot of it is discovery in the moment, as opposed to if you get a report back, it's kind of hard to like, you might get a report back and be like, oh, but then I want to know like why they didn't do that, and they may not probe on that. That's just my own bias.
The actual person's face as they're interacting
with the website, or yeah, right.
You can actually not just get a report of someone's interpretation, you can sit there and look at their face.
The emotional reaction, yeah, right. Yeah.
You're not getting the full interaction that you better.
Yeah, like I think further along in the product life cycle, or but yeah, exactly. Back there, yeah.
Yeah, so would you recommend like doing your user research before you actually start building something so that you can kind of figure out, what people in that community actually need and what they actually want? And the second part of the question is like face-to-face, user research better than doing things through a digital channel?
Yeah, so the second question kind of ties to what we were talking about. I think if you're in the very early stages of a company or product, face-to-face is, it's just like any meeting, right? If you email, it's asynchronous and you get very discrete bits of information, but if you're face-to-face, the information exchange like exponentially increases. So given when you're new, you're embryonic and everything is like greenfield. And so my bias would be face-to-face because you're in pure discovery mode. In terms of the first question, is it better to build? I think it depends on what you think you need to have to get the right reactions. So the buzzword is minimum viable product. Have you all heard of that or some version of that, right? So minimum viable product doesn't necessarily mean code at all. The famous case is Dropbox. Their minimum viable product was literally a video. So they didn't code anything. They just showed a video about like what it could do. And then they showed it to people and they got reactions. And people were like, well, but what if I wanted to email it to someone? So they actually like, the video itself was a catalyst for them to get the answers that they needed. So again, my personal bias is the less coding you do up front, the less investment you make until you really know what you're solving. That's the biggest issue, right? Is like, what problem are you solving, or what you have assumptions, but you need to validate those assumptions. So the earlier you can do it with real life people, the better, the more money you save. So, were you gonna ask me?
Yes, kind of. Because ultimately, what we're doing for people. We're not doing for computers for some arbitrary, faceless entity like we're probably used to doing when we work for people, because we're so abstracted from the customer. But if we're starting our own businesses and we say that we're innovative and we have these ideas to change the world is people. And so ultimately what we have to do is actually meet with the people in which we propose to help change their behavior, so make things more efficient with them. And if we're not doing that, then we're just wasting our time. And we're prolonging the inevitable failure. So, it's very important to be able to get over that introverted nature that tends to be cultivated within our work environments, and really get out here and really get on the street and really meet with the people that we propose to help change their lives. It helps. You're absolutely
Yes.
correct.
I totally agree.
I would also say that in reference to the Dropbox example, because I'm familiar with the example of the Dropbox. Dropbox had to do that because what it is that they envisioned was so abstract. So a video helped. But for other people who may not be doing things so abstract as Dropbox, you may very well have to code something, but that is only after you speak with your potential customers so that they can validate, like what you say, your assumptions. And they may give you different ideas. Okay, well, I didn't think about that. That needs to be in my minimum viable product. Because the minimum viable product should be the linchpin example of the solution.
Yeah, you're just trying to make something concrete, basically, and it doesn't have to be code that does it. Yeah.
I'd just like to say, like, speaking to the, doing your user research, all that information that people can pull in from there can then inform not just their product, but it can inform their marketing, their design, and provide lots of, the psychographic profile of who you're trying to communicate to. It's not just for your product alone, but it's going to be very useful for how you present yourself to the world as well.
Definitely. I mean, like, when I go back to, like, the whole everything fits together. It's like when you talk to users, that affects your marketing, it affects your branding, your sales strategy. It's like everything kind of hangs together. So it is hard to parse it out, but I would agree, if you don't talk to users, then you're building it all on this huge assumption that could be totally off. Yeah, definitely.
I do have a question based off the previous statement that you said a couple times. You say you don't necessarily need code. right? So you MVP?
Not initially, no.
Okay, because I went to the Web Forward website and I looked at your applications. It's not.
Oh yeah, for our program, yes, yes.
Please don't apply until you have.
Yeah. So our program, we do that because we want people that can actually execute on building the product, and we have a very specific focus on innovation around the web. So that's our focus. But when we're talking about startups in general, yes, and yeah. So that's our program, yeah. And there's a question back there, and then we can get to you back there. Or yes, sorry, in the blue.
How important is it to have a revenue model or a user acquisition plan, or what's more important? You have 10 users who pay you a lot, or 100,000 users who pay you nothing. Is one more valuable than the other?
Yeah, I mean, I always hate this, but it depends is usually an answer to so many questions. Like, it depends on what you're building and what your business model is. So, oh. So the difference is how important it is to, one, have a user acquisition plan or revenue model. Yeah. So for us, I think a business model is important. A user acquisition plan is helpful, but it's more important to know that our first priority is innovation around the technology. Again, for our program. I'm not saying for all. No, we want to have business models as well. So to finish the thought, so our first priority is innovation around the technology with a business model. So that's really what we're trying to bring to the we come out of the open source world, or out of Mozilla, and we want to really encourage people to innovate and do things that are helpful and opening up the web and opening up standards, but at the same time sustainable with a business model. So we don't want, it's not our goal to foster a bunch of nonprofits necessarily. We're not against it, but it's not our main focus. Let's see, there's there and then there.
Yeah, in the Bay Area, there are so many accelerators, incubators. Why someone should be attention to your one?
So again, our focus is around web technologies that are more open standards leaning. Either open source or just open standards, because that's what Mozilla cares about. So we're a part of Mozilla. So we focus on startups that are building things around, say, HTML5 or WebRTC. So we, as Mozilla, we think that's really important and healthy for the web. So Web Forward supports startups that are building into that. We're not against other startups, but that's just what we want to invest in. So that's our specific focus area. The other way that we're different is that we support entrepreneurs anywhere in the world. So Austin here lives in Austin, and he didn't have to move here for the program. We've had teams in Paris, London, India, Sweden, and they don't have to come uproot. They can focus on their markets, and they don't have to pay San Francisco real estate to be in our program. So that's another key way that we're different. And then finally, so I'd say just focusing on Mozilla's values and Mozilla's area of expertise, which is web, open web. And second, it's global. And third, we actually don't take equity in the companies, and we don't charge companies for the program. So we're very founder friendly. We just want founders to succeed. So as part of Mozilla, as a nonprofit, we're not in it to make money and generate huge returns. So that's why if you've got a tie-sharing startup that's got huge potential in Sweden, we don't really care because it's not very innovative around the technology. And we're not pressed to make tons of money from you. So we can truly help the startups that we think are really doing cool stuff for the web. So those are like our three differentiating points.
Thanks, Diane. I have 10 questions, but I'll ask maybe a couple. The Web Forward program, can you describe, probably 10, but what stage startup is ideal, in relation to what this gentleman asked about? If you have code, yes. But what stage would you like to see as an optimal app?
Yeah, I mean, most of our startups are like 2 to 3 people. That's typically the stage. They tend to be, I'll just say on average, they tend to be, say, 2 to 3 people, maybe a beta version, so that they've formulated the product, they've just demonstrated that they can actually like build a prototype or some sort of, version of the product, and they really need help getting the product market fit and all of the business stuff, like sort of fleshing out what the team doesn't have in-house. So the team doesn't have a legal person, the team doesn't have a salesperson, doesn't have a marketing expert. So the whole point of our curriculum, and by the way, feel free to talk to Austin later, even when I'm not around, to get his insights on the program. But so the whole idea is that we provide tools to sort of, it's almost like personal training for developers who are founders. So if you're a developer and you're a founder, you're gonna be really good at building code, but you're probably not going to want to do stuff you know you have to do, and that's why you go to personal trainer. So they like do, even though you know you should probably not eat a ton of sugar and you should run instead of take the elevator, like when you go to a trainer, you pay for a trainer, you're going to do it because it's this external force. And so a lot of our teams have told us that we're a forcing function to get them to do stuff that may not be rocket science, but they just would not do on their own. And we give them lots of accountability through coaching and other mentors to make sure that they do it. I mean, obviously we can't force people to do stuff, but we try to help people do stuff through mentorship and through structure. So it tends to be early stage, I'd say, with like a working prototype. That tends to be it. That said, again, like all the stuff that we're working on with them, you know, I think you can never do enough user research. You can never, you know, your financials, you should always be revisiting your financials, right? A lot of this stuff is evergreen, so even if you're a little bit further along, if you're not going to naturally like have the resources to do design well or to do marketing well, then I think we could help you. But that, in general, that tends to be the type of company that it's pretty early stage.
One follow-up question to that. The statistics that you quoted for Y Combinator, do you have any similar for Web Forward, the number of applicants and number of sessions?
Yeah, so it's changed over. We're a 2-year-old program, and our 4th class that Austin is in is graduating next Wednesday. So come to graduation in San Francisco if you want to check out the teams and meet them. The graduation is one of the few times they are together in the Bay Area. So our teams are coming back from Europe and wherever they live, Rhode Island, and they'll be there at graduation. So you can come check that out. But the statistics are, in terms of number of applications, it's just basically grown. So when we first started, we were hunting for teams because people didn't even know what we were doing, and it's not like we're ubiquitous or anything, so we always have marketing work to do to get people aware of it. But it's increased over time. So I can say for the last class, we admitted 9 teams. Our target is 8, but we had 9 teams we really liked out of about 100 people that applied. So that's grown. Like the first class, we were going out and trying to find them. So it wasn't always like that. So we're working on increasingly getting people aware. And I think one of the challenges of being global is that the alumni network is distributed as well. So we don't necessarily have a critical mass of people talking to each other about what we're doing. And a lot of us are in California, which I think is an asset for our teams because we can bring a lot of Silicon Valley expertise to them. But the downside is there's also a lot of noise in Silicon Valley, and there's tons of accelerators in Silicon Valley. So we're trying to figure out how can we promote it in which geographies that make the most sense. So anyway, I don't know if that kind of answers your question, sort of. Yeah, the last class, 10%. And in terms of like where they go, again, it's only a 2-year-old program, but most of our teams, we've had 33 teams total. Once this class finishes, we'll have worked with 33 teams total. That's because we used to have rolling admissions. There was some legacy stuff. So out of those 33, only 5 are no longer operational, but all the other ones are still either generating revenues. Some have gone on to do other accelerator programs like Techstars. Some have raised money up to $500,000 or $1 million, either from angels or venture capitalists. One raised about $300,000 from Mark Shuttleworth, his foundation. So others are just generating money from customers. So it's kind of all over the map how they're growing, but kind of like earlier someone was talking about the $500,000 exit, or like if you're building a healthy business that's good for the web, then we're happy about that. That's good. I mean, obviously the more impact you can have, even better, but we're not pushing people to grow artificially. We want to do what makes sense for them. So wait, somebody, no. Oh.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the requirement that like there be something like open source or leveraging with your company, like you kind of contribute some things to open source and kind of like do some stuff with HTML5, but not really like
are like driving that in any direction, so it's just kind of build.
You mean if you're personally contributing, but the company you have isn't, or?
So let's say like one of the things the company does, like they open source that like one module, but then like they don't buy like they're kind of using some features, but like not really groundbreaking with them. Does that still count, or are you guys really looking for companies that are focused on one of those technologies?
Probably the latter. And again, it's kind of hard to say in abstract without knowing what you know.
I've been working on something that's going to be like education focused, and there's a program called Books, and they have like a module section, so you can build like course modules. And so you could build like a generic module that like say had a course of like quizzes, you can submit something and like have it evaluated by this point, and then like return pass or fail. You could open source that component, but have like a whole evaluation back end.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we've had companies that have some stuff open sourced and some stuff, like we're not religious about it must all be open source. It's more, is it making the web more useful? And I know that's kind of fluffy, but I would say if it's not necessarily creating new functions around what the web can do, if it's just like a collaboration tool that's for a new market or something like that, it's not as interesting for us. Could be interesting for Mozilla, though. I mean, Mozilla's really interested in education, and so I would say there's no definitive, like, there's no religious answer like you must be 100% open source. We wrestle with it a little bit. We need to work on our own messaging, but we're open to it. Like, so happy to talk to you more. Let's see. Okay, good. Yeah?
Well, I work for educational university, and we had originally thought we would open source something we did, and we discovered that nobody at other universities actually had the technical capabilities to keep it up and running, so we thought we'd go with software as a service and try and make it so that you could make enough money to keep it going, but not make a million, try and make a big profit. And I was just wondering if you know of anybody else who might have that kind of model out there.
You mean software as a service?
Yeah, to provide software as a service on a not make a ton of money, but make enough to keep the program going.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of SaaS companies that don't make a lot of money, but more specifically, like, there's a couple of companies that have done our program, they're alumni, that could be interesting for you to look at. One is open source, actually, but then they offer a hosted version. And they sell to universities, but it's called Big Blue Button, or Blindside Networks is sort of the profit-making arm of that. And then the other one is called AppSembler, and they work with some educational institutions as well. So you can check them out on our website. I'm happy to, but they might provide some guidance. Yeah. So I know it's almost 12:30 and you have lunch. If there's one more question, I guess we would take that. Otherwise, we can cut you loose. Okay. Thank you so much. Oh.